Near an empty stretch of Route 66, in a small town called Dusthaven, Lena Hart, an independent mechanic, spent her savings to buy an old, rusted military container that no one cared about. The U.S. Army logo on its faded paint was barely visible. She wasn't chasing treasure. She only wanted to understand why her Iraq War veteran father once called it the only thing I could never take apart. But when the metal doors swung open, Lena didn't see scrap metal. She saw the secret her father left behind. Subscribe to Humankind Stories and help us keep alive the memories that deserve to be remembered. The workshop Lena Hart inherited wasn't anything special. The concrete floor was cracked, and a few loose wires dangled from the tin roof. But everything inside had stayed exactly the same since her father, a veteran who'd served in Iraq, passed away. Jars of bolts labeled in his handwriting, an old AM radio still tuned to his favorite station, and a dusty American flag hanging above the tool rack. He had never told her much about the war, just short, broken phrases, and he always flinched whenever a truck braked hard on the street. "It's not the bombs that scare me," Lena once heard him say. "It's the sound you can't turn off in your head." He died after a year of battling lung cancer, quietly, the way he had lived. No note, no message, only the shop and the rusted container in the yard, half buried in sand. Back then, Lena had wanted to leave Dusthaven. The town was too small, the memories too big. But one day, while cleaning the shelves and brushing off the dust, she saw a sentence her father had painted in red on a sheet of plywood. "The only thing I could never take apart. Faith engine." She'd always thought it was just a nickname for some old car. But when she stepped inside the container, a sharp, dry smell of metal hit her, precisely like the scent of motor oil her father used to scrub from his hands every night. A thick tarp covered a large object in the center, a control panel, alloy shell, and silver wiring that glimmered faintly in the half-light. At the front was a small metal plate, its engraving barely legible. "Faith engine, for use only by verified operator." Below it was a half-torn QR code and an emblem she didn't recognize, not from any military branch she knew. Lena stepped back, her heart pounding. On the table beside the machine lay a worn leather notebook with handwriting she knew instantly, her father's. The first page carried 4 words, written in block letters. For Lena Hart. She didn't touch it right away. Her hand froze mid-air, not because she feared an explosion, but because something deep inside told her that her name had never felt this heavy. Then, as her fingertips brushed the steel handle on the side of the machine, a faint vibration rose from within, not mechanical, but alive, as if something inside had just begun to breathe. Lena sat alone on the shop floor, her back against the old container, sunlight from the window stretching into long strips across the dusty concrete. In front of her lay her father's notebook, its pages yellowed, yet still perfectly straight, preserved as if he'd known she would read them someday. There were no religious lines, no prayers, only hand-drawn schematics, circuit diagrams, pencil notes, and an italic sentence at the bottom of the first page. "Memory is precious. Don't let anyone teach you how to forget." In the middle of the notebook was a diagram of the machine in front of her. Faith engine. No Army logos, no serial numbers. Only a double spiral symbol and a simple note beneath it. Emotional memory feedback structure, based on a stable internal signal. Lena frowned. The technical language didn't sound like the way her father used to talk, but the handwriting was unmistakably his. She stepped forward and carefully pulled away the tarp covering the control panel. The surface was dull gray steel, smooth and faintly reflective, like still water. No buttons, no keyboard. Only a single recessed circle, a perfect fit for a human palm. Lena hesitated, then pressed her hand into it. A dim blue light came on instantly, like a car headlight through fog. No sound, no warning, just one line of text appearing above her hand, embossed through the glass. "Faith engine active, awaiting alignment." She gasped and pulled her hand back, but the light remained. On the control panel, a faint fingerprint shimmered. Not hers. Lena brought her thumb close. The print was larger, sharper. It wasn't hers. She closed her eyes, heart racing. Part of her wanted to run. The other part, the same part that had taken apart her father's radio when she was 12, moved closer. When she opened her eyes, new text appeared. Access granted. Welcome back, Operator Hart. She whispered, Operator Hart. That's you, isn't it? No answer. But the light on the control panel softened, shifting to green. The same color she remembered from her father's uniform on his last day of service. Across the surface, a new string of characters slowly appeared. No command, no instruction. Just a single question. Are you ready to remember what he couldn't? A black Ford F-150 stopped in front of Lena's garage 3 days later. Dust from Route 66 swirled around its tires. She was welding a steel frame when the truck door slammed shut. A tall man with graying hair and a dark leather jacket stepped out. His eyes were sharp, steady, the kind of look carried by someone who had lived too long with secrets. Are you Lena Hart? I am. Who are you? Calder, he said, pulling an old, faded ID card from his pocket. Only one line was still legible. CIA, field operative, retired. Your father worked under my supervision on a project called Project Mercy. Lena stared at him. My father was just a civilian engineer. What are you talking about? Calder sighed, circling the container. Faith Engine isn't just hardware. It's a neural interface your father's team built. The first AI prototype designed to process emotional memory. The original goal was to help soldiers with PTSD, but then the higher-ups realized it could also store classified intel. He glanced at her. Human memory, if uploaded into a system, becomes the perfect data vault. Unhackable, undetectable. You're saying this thing holds war data? Maybe, Calder said. Or worse, the things they wanted to forget. He dropped a photocopied blueprint onto her workbench. Red notes scribbled across the margins. Unstable. Memory link may cause neural feedback. Classified. Operation Gulf Echo. Your father objected when they tried to turn Faith Engine into a tool for extracting prisoners' memories. Calder continued. He stole the prototype and disappeared. I thought he destroyed it. Until I heard you'd bought this container. A chill ran down Lena's spine. And now you want it back? Calder shook his head. I came to warn you. They don't want anyone knowing it still exists. If the system powers up, it'll send out a signal. And when that happens, I won't be the only one knocking on your door. He looked around the shop, then lowered his voice. Hey, Lena, I know you want to find your father, but sometimes people walk away to protect the ones they love. Don't let them bury him all over again. Calder headed back to his truck, calling out one last line over his shoulder. If that machine wakes up, it won't just remember your father. It'll remember the people still looking for it. Lena froze. Inside the workshop, the lights of Faith Engine flickered once, and then her father's voice echoed faintly through the built-in speaker. Lena, are you there? Don't let them take the machine. She dropped the welding torch and spun around. The shop lights went out. In the dark, only the green glow of Faith Engine remained, gleaming on her face like an eye opening after years of sleep. Lena couldn't sleep. The nights in Dusthaven no longer felt peaceful, not because of the wind, but because of the silence from the machine in her workshop. She sat alone before Faith Engine, her father's notebook lying open. One section had been taped shut with a strip of old masking tape. Lena carefully peeled it back. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in aluminum foil with a small handwritten note. If Faith Engine ever powers back on, this video will play automatically. It's the part I was never brave enough to tell you. She plugged the drive into a narrow port beside the control panel. The machine vibrated slightly. Then a simple interface lit up. Just a single line. Recorded 2011. Bethesda, VA Medical Center. The screen turned on. Her father appeared, younger, thinner, wearing a hospital gown, strands of gray in his hair. He looked straight into the camera. Hi, Lena. If you're seeing this, it means I didn't get to speak to you in person. I know you're smart. Stubborn, too. You always wanted to figure things out yourself, no explanations. So, here's the truth. I built Faith Engine because I believed memory, even painful memory, should never be forced away. It should be faced with compassion, not judgment. But when they wanted to turn it into a tool for interrogation, for breaking prisoners, I walked. I buried it, but I couldn't throw it away. Because of you. Lena's eyes began to sting. Her father glanced down, smiled softly, then held up a photograph. It showed him in uniform, holding her as a little girl. Behind them, an American flag hung above the garage door. She recognized it. It was the same dusty flag still hanging in the shop. I always believed that someday you'd be the only one who wasn't afraid to remember. And if you're here now, I was right. Don't use Faith Engine to find me. Use it to find yourself. Because the most critical memories aren't mine. They're yours. The video ended. Lena didn't move. For several seconds, the world went utterly still. Then the screen lit up again. A new message appeared. Ready to start full alignment. Lena stood frozen, staring at the interface. Below the line was a blinking icon, a dual fingerprint scan. Two prints side by side, one large, one small, as if the machine was waiting for both her father and her to come back together. At 3 a.m., headlights lit the entire yard like a rising sun. Lena jolted upright and peeked through the curtain. It was the same black Ford F-150, but Calder wasn't alone this time. 3 men stepped out, all dressed in dark clothing. No badges, no introductions, but Lena knew right away. They weren't here to make conversation. One of them spoke firmly. Ms. Hart, the Faith Engine is classified property. Possession and activation may constitute a federal offense. Calder already came by, Lena replied, keeping her voice steady. I know what's in it. I also know why you want it buried. Another man, shorter but with a colder stare, stepped forward. You don't understand. That machine doesn't just store data. It triggers deep layer memory, which means things people tried to forget, or were forced to forget, might resurface. That could be inconvenient for specific decision-makers from the Gulf War. Lena scoffed. Then it's doing exactly what it was built for, helping people face what they're responsible for. You talk like someone who's never survived a war. She turned sharply, voice cutting like steel. I survived the memories of someone who did. Every night outside the hospital room, when my father couldn't sleep unless the radio was on to drown out the sound of bombs in his head. No one answered. One of them pulled out a sheet of paper. We're seizing the container. Effective immediately. Lena backed into the shop. She locked the door behind her, rushed to the Faith Engine, yanked out cables, pulled the backup power cell. Everything went black. Silence. She slumped down, hands trembling. Her eyes turned to the photograph still hanging beside the dusty flag that her father had folded after retiring. She remembered his words that day. You can't hold on to everything, but at the very least, you can hold on to what's right. She broke down. For the first time, not because she was scared, but she felt like she might lose the last thing he truly believed in. In the darkness, the Faith Engine came back on. Not through electricity, through its own internal memory. The green light flared to life, and then a deep, familiar voice echoed, this time her mother's, the mother who had passed when she was just a child. Lena, if you're still here, don't let them cut off what your father left behind. Lena bolted the garage door shut from the inside, 3 locks, then rushed back toward the Faith Engine. The screen had returned to life, even though the external power was still cut. It was running on an internal backup system. Something she hadn't even known existed. On the panel, the interface had changed. No more greetings. No more access granted. Just a single line. Are you ready to remember your part? Lena froze. She'd thought this was about uncovering her father's memories. But now the machine was turning inward, toward her. She placed her hand on the sensor. A video appeared on the screen. Old, grainy, distorted, but not unfamiliar. It was the hospital room at Bethesda. Her father's room. But this time, the camera faced outward from the bed, and standing in the doorway was a 10-year-old girl, clutching a teddy bear, frozen like a statue. It was Lena. The screen continued with audio only. Come in, sweetheart. I'm okay. But little Lena only shook her head, eyes brimming, then turned and ran. That was the last time she ever saw him awake. She had never dared to remember it. She thought time had blurred it away. But Faith Engine did not forget. A second voice recording followed, one she'd never heard before. Her father again, quiet, private. If you've found this, forgive me. Not because I gave up, but because I wasn't strong enough to keep you close. I didn't want my wounds to become your burden. But if you're still here, it means you didn't just forgive me, you forgave yourself. Lena broke down. No more holding it in. No more pretending it was just about him. All these years, she'd blamed herself. For not going into the room, not saying goodbye, for failing. But now, the machine didn't judge. It just remembered and waited. A new message appeared. Alignment complete. Memory bridge unlocked. A new interface opened. Not a map. A list of people who had once connected to Faith Engine and the memories they had never dared to unlock. At the top of the list, one name glowed. Hart, Lena, pending transfer. And the machine asked, "Do you wish to share your memory forward?" Lena placed both hands on the control panel. The words, "Do you wish to share your memory forward?" were still blinking. She took a deep breath. "Do it," she whispered. "Share it all." The Faith Engine gave off a low hum, and the interface shifted to a soft amber hue, like late afternoon sunlight spilling across the old wooden shelves. A map unfolded on the screen, not a geographic one, an emotional one. Each glowing point marked a veteran who had once used the device, from Texas, Colorado, to the northern ridges of California. Next to each light was a quiet message, "Memory lock active, eligible for restoration." Somehow, the Faith Engine had retained connection data before it was buried, and now it was inviting Lena, the only active user, to reopen those forgotten bridges. She typed her name into the coordinator field. The system accepted. The next day, she posted an update on an obscure veterans forum. Faith Engine reactivated. Project Mercy never ended. We don't forget you. Come find what they told you to bury. It wasn't long before someone knocked on her door. His name was Ray Moreno, a Vietnam War vet with deep-set eyes and a full head of silver hair. "I'd heard whispers about Project Mercy," he said. "I don't remember the face of the man who pulled me out of the fire in Pleiku, 71, but I'd give anything to see it again." Lena invited him in. Faith Engine powered up, quietly, like breath. Ray placed his hand on the console. Within a minute, a blurry image emerged. Imperfect, ghost-like, but clear enough to recognize the young man carrying him through the smoke and chaos. Ray didn't speak. He wept, not from pain, but because the last memory he thought time had eroded had come back whole, like a gift. In the following weeks, dozens of veterans made their way to Dust Haven, not to relive the war, but to remember with purpose, to know they hadn't forgotten for nothing. One evening, as Lena tidied the workshop, the Faith Engine displayed a new message. "New connection pending. Operator unknown. Location unlisted." Beneath the message, a silver ring icon flickered, identical to the one her father always wore. And then the machine asked again, "Where does the next story begin?" The air had started to cool over the land near Route 66. Late autumn winds rattled the tin roof of the workshop, but inside, everything felt strangely warm. The Faith Engine still stood there, not as an artifact or a classified device, but like a quiet gatekeeper of memory. Lena sat in an old wooden chair, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, eyes fixed on the blinking words on the screen. Where does the next story begin? She didn't know who had just connected. The name read Operator Unknown, but the silver ring icon made her throat tighten. It was her father's wedding ring, which he took off when her mother passed away, and quietly hung on a key hook in the workshop. She had never seen him wear it again. There was no explanation. But with the Faith Engine, the extraordinary always began when you stopped trying to explain and simply listened. She stepped closer and gently touched the screen. The light shifted to a soft white glow. A message appeared. "Bridge open. Do you wish to carry it forward?" Lena nodded. No more tears. No more anger. Only a belief that memory, when faced with kindness, could become a place of refuge. She looked around the workshop. On the wall was an old photograph, her father in uniform, holding little Lena in his arms, a faded American flag in the background. now cleaned and hanging neatly by the door. Beneath the photo, she had taped a handwritten note. "We don't change the past. We carry it carefully, honestly, and forward." The next morning, she opened the shop as usual. An older woman stood outside, holding a weathered envelope. "I heard you help people remember the things no one else dares to speak of," she said. I need to remember my husband's voice. He passed before I could say goodbye." Lena smiled. "Come on in. Around here, no one remembers alone. If you believe that some memories, even the painful, even the unfinished, are worth holding on to, if you've ever forgotten a face, a voice, or a hug you never thought you'd lose, if you believe we grow stronger by remembering, not by forgetting,